What is the central bank's role in the housing market? That's the topic I'd like to delve in today. Let's do it.
All day you climb and right back down the other side. How far will you go? With no guarantee, you know.
Withdrawing stimulus too slowly risks inflating the real estate sector further and worsening financial stability are some concerns for the longer term, in my opinion, from the empirical data that I delved into when we're thinking about the longer term here. So if we pull back too hard means unsettling markets and sending property prices lower, threatening the economic recovery from Covid19 pandemic, people seem to think that the biggest reason housing prices are rising at such historic rates is the global pandemic, the record-setting low interest rates, combined with an increased desire to leave city life behind and buy a home in the suburbs. Now, I'm more optimistic about the city centers, like I said in the past. I think there's going to be a hybrid situation there, and people are going to go back to the city centers. You know, millennials were beginning to migrate towards the suburbs even before the pandemic, and that only increased over the last 18 months, especially with remote work becoming a commonplace practice due to COVID. Like I said, I think a lot of companies, that they have that office space, they're going to hybrid it. Some are going to keep their space, or they're going to curtail it. So yes, that is part of it, those points, but I think we need to look between the lines to see what is really going on. Central banks, you know, with memories of the global financial crisis that was triggered by a housing bust still fresh in policymakers' minds, how to keep a grip on soaring housing prices is a dilemma in the forefront of deliberations as recovering growth seems some central banks discuss slowing asset purchases and even raising the interest rates. So the all-powerful, the almighty Federal Reserve officials who favor tapering their bond buying programs have cited rising house prices as one reason to do so. In particular, they are looking hard at the Fed's purchases of mortgage-backed securities, which some worry are stroking housing demand in an already hot market. So in the coming weeks, central bankers in South Korea, Canada, New Zealand are going to meet to set policy with the soaring housing prices in each sparring pressure to do something to keep homes affordable for the little person. What about the regular worker? So they're going to meet and have a little powwow. So New Zealand's policymakers are battling the hottest property market in the world. I know some people that have moved there, you know, they're worried about the world ending and they got a bunker. You know, according to the Bloomberg Economics Global Bubble Ranking, they're ranked number one. The central bank, which meets on Wednesday, has been given another tool to tackle the issue, and its projections for official cash rates show it's starting to rise in the second half of 2022, facing criticism for its role in stroking housing prices. Canada's central bank has been among the first from advanced economies to shift to a less expansionary policy with another round of tapering expected at a policy decision also on Wednesday. So the Bank of Korea last month warned that the real estate is significantly overpriced and the burden of household debt repayment is growing. People are doing 40-year mortgages. They're pulling cash out, going on vacations, extending their mortgages. So it's growing. But a worsening virus outbreak may be a more pressing concern at Thursday's at a meeting in Seoul. So, hey, they want maybe more lockdowns. Why not? So that needs to be considered. In its biggest strategic rethink since the creation of the euro, the European Central Bank this month raised its inflation target Wow, it's about time. And in a nod to housing pressures, officials will start considering owner-occupied housing costs in their supplementary measures of inflation. Well, it's about time you got on track there. The Bank of England last month indicated unease about the UK housing market. So another authority, some top economists, another bank have signaled it's worried about the effect of ultra-low rates on the housing market and the risk of buildup of financial imbalances. Wow, it's starting to hit the mainstream a little bit. So I would say listen to this very carefully. This is interesting. The Bank of International Settlements used its annual report released last month to warn that house prices had risen more steeply during the pandemic than fundamentals would suggest. Increasing the sector's vulnerability if borrowing costs rise. So right now, while the unwinding of the pandemic era support is expected to be gradual for most central banks, how to do so without hurting mortgage holders will be a key challenge, according to an individual who used to be in charge of monetary policy at the Bank of Japan. So monetary policy is a blunt tool, said a top economist. If it is used for some specific purpose, like restraining housing market activities, that could lead to other problems like overkilling the economic recovery. But not acting carries another risk. Analysis by Bloomberg Economics show that the housing markets are already exhibiting 2008 style bubble warnings. So stroking warnings of financial imbalances and deepening inequality. Sweden, New Zealand, and Canada are the world's frothiest housing markets based on the key indicators used in Bloomberg Economics dashboards focused on member countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So, the central banks getting a little worried, sounding the alarm. So the UK and the US are also near the top of the risk rankings. UK might be a little ahead from the data that I looked at. So as many economies still grapple with the virus or slow loan growth, central bankers may look for alternatives to interest rate hikes. Let's keep them low forever, such as changes to loan-to-value limits or risk weighting of mortgages, so-called macro-prudential policy. Yet some measures aren't guaranteed to succeed because other dynamics like inadequate supply or government tax policies are important variables for housing too. And while ever cheap money is gushing from central banks, it's just like a river. So such measures are likely to struggle to rein in the prices. So it's getting a little wild right now. So the best approach would be to stop the further expansion of central bank balance sheets. According to Gunther University, who is an expert on international monetary systems. So as a second step, interest rates could be increased in a very slow and diligent manner over a long period of time. Another possibility is that house prices reach a natural plateau. UK house prices, for example, fell for the first time in 5 months in June, a sign that the property markets may have lost momentum as a tax incentive was due to come to an end. And I talked about that. There's no sign of that in the US, though. Word demand for homes remains strong right now despite record high prices. Pending home sales increased according to all U.S. regions in May. with the Northeast and West posting the largest gains. So the U.S. is ahead of the curve on the U.K. So while navigating the housing boom won't be easy for central banks, it may not be too late to ward off the next crisis. Owner-occupied demand versus speculative buying remains a strong driver of growth. Banks aren't showing signs of the kind of loose lending that preceded the global financial crisis in the past. And more people this time around, as I talked about, have equity. This according to global economists at HSBC Holdings. So there are some differences, going on, but there's still some triggers and worries. If home prices aren't rising due to a shift in supply versus demand, which the pandemic has created due to more remote working and people wanting more space, it may not trigger a crisis in the same way as previous housing booms. So the problem, may arise further down the line with younger people priced out of the property ladder even more, which is going on. So as they tiptoe away from their crisis settings, monetary authorities and economies with heavily indebted households will need to be especially careful, said Alicia Garcia, chief economist for Asia Pacific, who used to work for the ECB and International Monetary Fund. So she's way up there. She's got your back. She's got your back 100%. So real estate prices, as well as other asset prices, will continue to balloon as long as global liquidity remains so ample, she said. But the implications are much more severe than other asset prices as they affect households much more widely. So, the central banks got a lot of power, Federal Reserve. People don't talk about it enough. And, they play a role in this process too. And they're behind the scenes pulling the strings. And that was the purpose of this video, to delve into what's going on in London and across the world with these central banks and all these countries doing this printing and how it's affecting their monetary policy and where they're kind of going with this. So there's some red flags there. They're starting to talk about inflation and do some things and look at these housing prices because the fundamentals are somewhat flawed. And that is a concern when you start digging into the micro of this and not just look at the macro. So I just wanted to bring that to light, what's going on. Thanks for your time. Be creative. And it's crazy times right now, but try to be kind out there. Take care.